All right, I think we're ready to get started. So, hello everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Sarah Merricks, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at the Global Network for Zero. Prior to GNFC, I was at the U.S. Green Building Council for about 9 years and served as Mahesh Ramanujam's Chief of Staff. I was primarily responsible for helping Mahesh implement his vision in the market, but also handled marketing efforts for LEED in our international markets outside of the US, as well as for the ARC Performance Platform and GBCI's other rating systems and credentials. Today, I'm going to start with a high-level overview of GNFC, why we were founded, and our certification offerings. Then we'll hear from Kristen Brubaker at Green Badger, who will cover strategies during construction for net zero success. And then Mahesh will continue on with his thoughts on occupancy and certification. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And if we have time, we'll try to address them at the end. Now jumping in, I'm going to put some numbers on the screen briefly just to set the context to where we are, where we need to go, and how fast we must move to get there. Here's where we stand globally with net zero. Only 0.023% of the world's buildings are net zero. Net zero buildings are projected to grow 29% annually through 2027, but we're facing a 70% shortfall in the number of low carbon buildings needed, and investor and tenant demand is rising fast. To reach net zero by 2050, the construction industry must decarbonize 3 times faster than in the last 30 years. The next frontier is clear: designing, constructing, and retrofitting buildings to address all emissions across scope 1, 2, and 3. With less than 5 years to meet the Paris Agreement's targets, most net zero pledges remain behind schedule. But the UN says 1.5 degrees Celsius is still achievable if we move faster. Buildings are central to that transition. Now that we've set the stage, I want to talk about what we're doing to support this at GNFC. When Mahesh and I co-founded GNFC, along with Scott Horst, we knew that we needed to focus our efforts on breaking down the barriers that we saw that buildings faced in decarbonizing. Our framework is grounded in years of market insights and global best practices, and is built to simplify net zero implementation by eliminating the complexity that holds projects back. We also did extensive market research, interviewing business and policy leaders in the decarbonization space across the US to really pinpoint the issues they faced and home in on what the unique value proposition was that we could bring to the market to try and scale change. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel and create yet another rating system. So where we landed was creating a data-backed net zero platform and certification program designed to meet this moment. The approach we take to certification is incremental, celebrating milestones projects make on the road to net zero. Our goal is simple: make net zero accessible, practical, and measurable for any building or business anywhere. We want to make sure that no building and no business is left behind. GNFC supports buildings, portfolios, and organizations with a suite of net zero certification programs, a global network providing expert support, and a supportive community of climate leaders working to accelerate decarbonization efforts towards a zero emissions future. One of the biggest challenges we see is that buildings and businesses lack credible net zero transition plans, and implementation is slow because leaders don't have the data to make the business case. That's what we set out to fix. We take a 0 to 0 approach, providing the top, middle, and bottom of the market with a solution they can use to either take the next step to net zero or to just get started. For instance, buildings that have already achieved high levels of sustainability performance can use our platform and process to take the next step and tackle their scope 3 emissions. But there are also no prerequisites, and we meet buildings where they are, recognizing progress at every step. This means that we enable buildings that have never pursued a green building program or businesses that are just getting started to put in place a plan and roadmap to transition their building, asset, or business to net zero. We currently offer 3 certification options for buildings, portfolios, and businesses. Our net zero certification for buildings provides a framework to demonstrate that buildings are designed, constructed, and operated to net zero by removing scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, generating more energy than they consume, saving more water than they use, reducing waste, and positively impacting the physical, mental, and social health of occupants. Here we offer 4 categories: energy, water, waste, and emissions, with 3 certifications under each. We define net zero emissions as a building balancing its total scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions with equivalent emissions removed or offset. You may ask yourself, how do we calculate this? Our certification is built on the GHG protocol, a widely used mechanism to measure scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So for scope 1, we look at, as defined by GHG protocol, fuel sources and their consumptions, the consumption of refrigerants and fuel consumption of vehicles owned or controlled by the reporting organization. For scope 2, we look at a building's annual consumption from these sources. And for scope 3, we look at indirect downstream activities, including the 15 categories outlined here as defined by GHG protocol. Our next certification category is energy. We define net zero energy as a building generating renewable energy, either on-site or off-site, equal to its annual energy consumption, resulting in the mitigation of scope 1 and 2 emissions and zero net energy drawn from the grid. And the last 2 categories impact things beyond scope emissions. Net zero water is achieved when a building's annual water consumption is balanced with an equivalent amount of water replenished on-site or through alternative sources. And net zero waste is achieved when the waste generated by a building is diverted from landfills through practices such as recycling, composting, and reuse. Projects can earn net zero design certification, net zero construction certification, and net zero operation certification. Now, a little bit about what makes GNFZ unique before I pass it on to Kristen. This is a question we get asked a lot. As I mentioned, since our certification is based on the GHG protocol, this means it's based on pure accounting and data. So unlike traditional certification, where emissions data may be obscured, GNFZ brings quantification of emissions reduced to the forefront. This enables clients to access, quantify, and extract emissions data for compliance with initiatives such as SBTI and GRI. Second, unlike most green building programs, there are no prerequisites. We meet every building where it is, whether you're just starting out or already on your way. Our incremental approach ensures every project can progress toward net zero. Third, we're laser focused on emissions, not point accumulation. This empowers asset owners and project teams to implement the most cost-effective ways to cut emissions without chasing strategies that don't translate into emissions reductions. As a result, clients can optimize their investments, increase efficiency, and reach their targets faster. GNFZ ensures access to best-in-class expertise, making net zero goals achievable. Fourth, our platform supports compliance, future planning, and reporting to frameworks like SBTI and GRI and is recognized by GRESB. Fifth, GNFZ certification is unique because it addresses all 3 scopes and has an unparalleled focus on scope 3 compared to others. And lastly, because we follow the guidelines in GHG protocol, our certifications more accurately account for embodied emissions. Our design certification assesses embodied emissions from building materials, while our construction certification assesses embodied emissions from building materials, processes, and emissions due to electricity, fuel, and more consumed exclusively for construction. And our operations certification assesses embodied emissions from building materials or equipment used during major retrofitting or end-of-life replacement during the baseline year considered. This is especially critical because embodied emissions are becoming an increasingly important in green building design and construction. They account for 11% of global carbon emissions, and as buildings become more energy efficient and their operational footprints decrease, this percentage is only expected to grow. The thing you need to know about embodied emissions is that once you have them baked into a project, there is nothing you can do to reduce them. This is why you have to make critical decisions in the design stage to avoid materials and practices that account for them. So for the design phase to construction to operations, we account for embodied carbon at every stage. Of course, GNFZ is not just a certification platform. We are also a growing network of net zero focused leaders and champions working to empower people and organizations to accelerate the realization of a zero emissions world. We are network focused on lasting, equitable, and global living standards serving people and the planet. I would encourage you to go to globalnetworkforzero.com, where you will find a wealth of information on net zero insights, as well as case studies on net zero projects. I would also encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter and if you would like to connect with Mahesh and I and GNFC on LinkedIn. We frequently also host net zero focused webinars like this one that are all free to watch. And with that, I will now turn it over to Kristen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm just getting my slides pulled up here, so you should be able to see those now. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here today talking about implementing ESG in construction to align with net zero goals on construction sites, which is something that I've spent basically my entire career working on. So I'm excited to dive in. So as Sarah mentioned, my name is Kristen Brubaker. I am the head of Sustainable Construction Solutions here at Green Badger. I've been part of the Green Badger team since the end of 2022, but prior to that, I actually spent several years as a sustainability coordinator for a large GC. So I have many years of experience of understanding, the unique opportunities and challenges that occur on job sites and within construction companies, and just looking at how we can look at sustainability and make better choices on the job site to align with different goals, including net zero energy emissions, water, and waste. So before I get into the bulk of my presentation, I just wanted to share that if you're really interested in this topic of job site sustainability, I'd highly recommend checking out this ebook that we have available on our website. It's called The General Contractor's Guide to ESG Implementation. It does a really deep dive into this topic, a lot more than what we're able to get to in our time here today. So if you want to learn more or maybe have additional questions, I would highly recommend checking out this resource. And again, it's on our website, available for download at no cost. So that way everybody can have access to the information in the slides and beyond here. But I wanted to take a second just to kind of step back and talk about where net zero fits in with ESG. So if you are new to ESG, it stands for environmental, social, and governance, which refers to a set of metrics that can be used to evaluate a business. And so it's often a tool that's used by investors to make good investment decisions, because organizations that are prioritizing environmental, social, and governance related issues are often smart investments because they are prioritizing the big issues that we see in today's world, and also that we anticipate will become more prevalent here in the coming years. And so this slide has a couple of examples of across all of the different categories, the types of metrics you might see in ESG. But obviously with today's call, we're really focusing in on that environmental piece, because net zero construction sites would fall under this environmental category. This is really where any goal related to your emissions, your energy, your waste, your water would all fall. But like I said, in the ebook, we actually go into some of these other categories as well, if there's interest there. And then to kind of bring it back to, net zero, really at the end of the day, both ESG and net zero are business strategies, right? They help organizations really prioritize what's important to them, and can be really effective ways to improve upon their current business. And this is because companies that prioritize ESG, sustainability, net zero, they're often found to be more profitable. They attract and retain employees, especially those that identify as millennial and Gen Z, and are also favored by investors. So there's a lot of advantages to keeping sustainability in mind here and at the forefront. Now, with a lot of the strategies I'm going to talk about today with sustainability on job sites and, creating a path to net zero, implementation is very apples to oranges, even just within the construction industry. You can think about something and it may work for your business, and your competitor down the road, it's not going to be applicable to them. And that's just because there's so much diversity in this industry, which is really great. but also, just kind of keep in mind as we talk about this, there may be a lot of things that we talk about here today that will work well for your organization, and some things that may not. But all that to say, I still think sharing is really what's going to move the industry forward here. Even though we might not all be able to relate or implement the same things, getting the information out there is just so valuable. So that way we can continue to learn from one another. And so again, some of the big things that we see specifically in construction that can impact the ability to implement sustainability are, again, just things to keep in mind as you are looking to drive your construction sites towards net zero. Company size is a big factor, right? Do you have, one location in one part of the country, or do you have 50 offices across the entire country? How many job sites are we looking at? Are you starting with maybe 1 or 2 job sites, or are you seeing a huge demand from clients and are looking to roll this out at a bigger scale? It can even really be defined by what types of construction projects you're working on, anywhere from comparing, vertical construction to horizontal, or even, if your company prioritizes those smaller interiors projects, or if you're chasing the mega $1 billion+ jobs that seem to be more and more prevalent nowadays. Another big thing to keep in mind, and we'll touch on this more in a second, is your number of employees that are engaged with net zero. Might be a bit of a spoiler alert for what's coming, but it shouldn't just be your sustainability person. Where your company currently stands on sustainability, right? If you've been working on this for years, you've got a corporate sustainability program, that your implementation strategy is probably going to be a little bit further down the line than if any of you are here learning about this stuff for the first time today, which is great. Not to say that one's better than the other, but it's just a different approach that you have to take. The frameworks, which Sarah mentioned, and I'll talk about here more in a moment. And of course, there's many other factors. So just know that, each implementation strategy is going to look really different. But again, here's some suggestions, or at least things to get you thinking about how you can work towards this path at your company. So to kind of touch on standards briefly, so right now, there isn't a required ESG standard across the construction industry, but as we've been talking about here today, there are frameworks like the Global Network for Zero, which is great for construction companies that are looking to look at their construction practices. And the nice thing is, again, there is so much overlap with other reporting frameworks. So if you're doing the work for your Global Network for Zero certification, that's going to help you reach some of these other larger frameworks that you also may have to report to as part of, a shareholder requirement or something like that. So it all goes hand in hand, and there's also, many different ways that this work that you do can help you with these reporting efforts. Now, there's a couple drivers that we see here in the construction industry. The first, and shouldn't come as a shock, right, is there are certainly companies that have worked towards net zero because it has been client driven. There are many companies out there that really do prioritize sustainability. They've done the work of looking at their own internal operations. They, certify all of their buildings, but now they want to make sure that their partners and their job sites and just all the areas that they have an impact on are also in alignment with those standards. So we do see a lot of this. So again, if anything, be prepared, because clients may be asking about this or have an interest in you doing something like this. But then we also see plenty of companies that are just doing this on their own because, again, it's part of their business practices. They know it's the right thing to do, and they've been the early adopters to say, we want to make a change on our construction sites. No matter what our clients are asking of us, that's important to us. Now, as I mentioned earlier, sustainability is definitely more than just, a one-person job. Some construction companies may have one sustainability titled person, others may have a few, some may have none. But the important thing to remember is that when you are truly trying to go for zero, this is a team effort. It's going to require a lot more buy-in and participation from members of your team, aside from somebody with a sustainability title. If you're changing on-site practices, you're really going to need to have a good support system that includes, your EH&S, your project managers, information technology and IT, your C-suite, and of course legal, with any sort of shakeup or changes that you see. Again, just really important to make sure that this isn't siloed, that it's part of, every business decision that you make. So then when we actually talk about making changes on construction site, the first step that's going to be important to take is really just to understand what you're trying to accomplish, what your scope is. We've talked about today that, net zero can apply to emissions, energy, waste, water. Where are you focusing? What do you start with? Is this client driven? Do they have a very specific set of requirements they want you to follow? Is this something you're doing on your own? It's just really important to sit down and really make sure everybody who's working on this has a clear understanding of what's going on and what goal you're ultimately trying to get to in regards to net zero. The second thing, and Sarah did a great job just talking about the importance of data collection, right? Like you really need to benchmark and have just a good understanding of where you actually are today in order for you to make changes and improvements in the future that will get you closer, to where you need to be. So my personal recommendation, I should say, is to really take this as a tiered approach, right? Starting with things that are directly within your company's control and then kind of moving outwards. This will help it so it's not super overwhelming, that you focus on the things where you have the biggest chance of having an impact. And again, it can just create a better sense of accomplishment with working through things one at a time, rather than trying to just overwhelm yourself and try to tackle just everything at once. So with this tier one, the example I like to use is starting with the data that you already have, right? Or maybe not you specifically, but someone within your company has this data, right? And my example for this is, if you're paying an energy bill or you're paying a fuel ticket, you know exactly how much energy or fuel you are consuming. So therefore, it is an extra step to go ahead and convert that to, okay, what are the emissions from that? But it should be relatively, achievable, again, if you're already paying those bills. Your company likely already has this data. And so, you can either utilize a software or build in a process to then quickly be able to take that and apply it, for purposes related to sustainability, in this case, your emissions. The next step is to focus on information, again, that's going to be attainable, right? It's still within your company's control. It just might require extra steps in a process. It might require some additional education on our part, right? So one thing that kind of jumped out to me here, and that we've actually seen a lot of construction companies do when it comes to waste management, there are companies that, they track waste and what their recycling rates are across every single, project, regardless of whether there's a sustainability component or not, right? Because again, you're still getting those tickets. You just might not have a formal way of documenting that if there isn't another sustainability goal on top of that already for waste management. So again, it could be a little bit of a process update. It could be, adding additional step or, software to support you in being able to track this information. But again, just saying, okay, across our company, we really want to understand what our impact is related to waste. So let's start measuring that on every single project. And then the last thing, which is frankly going to be probably the most difficult, are the things that are going to require input from other parties. And so with construction, that's usually a lot of what actually happens on the job site, right? It's working with subcontractors, doing that material selection for your embodied carbon tracking. Definitely still important, but just be mindful that it's probably going to take a lot of collaboration on the part of, designers, subcontractors, other stakeholders. And so that's, again, just something to be mindful of as you move through this process. Now, once you, go through that benchmark, you can really use that data to set the goals that you're going to achieve, right? Nobody's going to, say today that we're going to have net zero job sites and it's going to be completed by the end of the year, right? No, we need to create goals and stagger them in a realistic way that is also going to be a challenge and is going to drive us. So with these examples that we've been talking about right here, for example, if we get an understanding of where our energy use is coming from on a project, and I've got this style here on the left side of the screen. From my perspective, if nearly 40% of our emissions are coming from electricity usage, that's the first place to start. That's where the biggest opportunity for improvement is. I'm not going to go blindly tackle, in this case, business travel, which is just like a very small percentage. And so you can do the same thing on the waste side. If you start tracking waste across your company for, this last quarter of 2025, and you realize, okay, across the entire company, we're only diverting 11% of our waste, setting a goal by 60% of the end of next year is just not realistic, right? It can help you identify goals to stagger you towards that goal overall, but it can really help drive those decisions on how you meet different milestones that ultimately get you to that final goal of zero. But it's important to have those steps in the middle, especially if we're talking about a large number of job sites. And then finally, the fun part is implementing tactics, to help you achieve those goals that you set. And this is where a lot of creativity comes into play. This is where you're going to get a lot of differences between what you can do. So, some things, if you're trying to reduce emissions, you can look at things like different biofuels, electrifying equipment, purchasing electric vehicles if you have company-owned vehicles, or incentivizing your own employees to purchase an EV rather than give them a traditional gas card. Going to be things like that. And there's a whole lot of case studies that are out there from other companies that have worked through this and what's worked well, and a lot of really cool pilots on things like these renewable fuels and electric equipment if you're interested. And then finally, just to kind of bring it back to what I do at Green Badger, we are a software provider that helps construction companies specifically track their sustainability metrics in order to achieve net zero goals. So we do this at both a project level, but also everything rolls up into a corporate dashboard. So you can understand on both sides, where you stand when it comes to things like waste, carbon, energy, and water. We also get into a lot of the social and governance metrics as well. But again, our specialty has always been sustainability. So this is stuff I'm in the weeds of every single day. So really happy to chat more about, what you can do. And, if you have questions, I'm certainly happy to address those here at the end of the presentation. We also just have a lot more information on our website that I can direct you to after this call. And yeah, just wanted to thank the Global Network for Zero one last time for inviting me to this call. And just a reminder that there's more of a deep dive on this topic here on our website, and that is the URL that you can access there. But that brings me to the end of the content I had prepared today, but really looking forward to the Q&A and discussion that we can have here towards the end of the call.
Thank you, Kristen. Your message resonated with me at multiple levels, but I like that line, ESG and net zero are indeed business strategies, smart business strategies, I should say. So thank you very much. Very nice presentation. So let me jump in. Sarah, if you could just pull up the slides if you're okay with it. Hello, everyone. Today it's an honor to speak with all of you today. And, I was just, Sarah and Kristen have been talking. What should we talk about today? So I think Kristen recommended that we talk about occupancy and certification. That is what I got, and it's my favorite topic to discuss. So let me start by taking you to a journey that began in 2019 when we launched the Living Standard campaign at US Green Building Council, a campaign rooted in a simple but powerful belief. A higher living standard is what every person on the planet deserves. All of it. Whatever we have discussed today and what we will discuss tomorrow, all of it is about creating a higher living standard for every person on the planet, because that's what they deserve. So back then, we said that sustainability must be about people. Then we also said green buildings must not only reduce emissions, but also raise the quality of life for occupants and communities. Now, today, that vision is becoming a reality, and the conversation around net zero has shifted from technical metrics to boring things like carbon and emissions to actually human outcomes. And I am proud to say that Global Network for Zero is helping lead that shift. Now, you may ask the question, why net zero must raise the living standard? So net zero is no longer about carbon emissions. It's about people. It's about creating buildings and communities that are healthier, safer, more resilient, and of course, more equitable. In 2019, I said we must tell a better story, one that connects sustainability to health, safety, and opportunity. Because people don't just want green buildings, they want better lives. Better buildings equal better lives. And that's what Net Zero must deliver. And that's what the Living Standard campaign set out to prove, that sustainability is not a luxury, it is a basic right. And of course, to raise the living standard through Net Zero, we must embed strategies across the building life cycle. Most of the people will ask me this question, where do I get started on Net Zero? I always say to them, start where you are. If you're looking at a product, put as much thinking into seeing whether you can accomplish Net Zero. Whether you can achieve it or not, that introspection helps. So generally you start with operations, then you look at construction, then you look at design. And ideally we'd like everybody to look from design, construction, operations, but that should not become an excuse because you are already in construction, you're already in operations. Every intervention and every introspection is an opportunity. So some of the ideas, during the design phase of a building, look at your passive design for comfort and efficiency. Second, solar orientation and daylighting for mental health. Low VOC materials for indoor air quality. And of course, layouts that promote movement and connection. And during the construction phase, you talk about modular systems to reduce waste. You talk about green procurement and local sourcing. Everybody around the world is scrambling around scope 3 emissions and embodied emissions. The easiest way to accomplish that is through green procurement, because that becomes your way of creating a demand. And you all know that demand changes everything. So when you start changing the demand, everybody understands that when you demand something, people start introspecting. I interestingly saw a question on the chat to Kristen asking that, hey, can I get a client list? And that is about demand. Of course, we have supply chain leaders like the one who asked the question is available to actually take it and deliver you a better product. So let's create the demand. And of course, inclusive hiring and community engagement. And then operations phase. During the operation phase, you want to think about smart systems to monitor energy, water, and air. As much as I like really the dashboard that Christian showed, it succinctly shows everything in a very simpler way. And that is basically a validation that the underlying data is robust, underlying data is reliable, underlying data is creating a transparent manner in which actions can be taken by business leaders. Of course, renewable energy integration continues to be the leading frontier for getting to net zero. Occupant dashboards are important, but feedback loops are more important. What do you do with those dashboards? How are your occupants engaging? And then last but not the least, maintenance protocols that prioritize health. There are so many small interventions are happening on a daily basis, but they must happen to create a great building so that we can create an impactful living. So obviously these strategies are not just technical. It's very easy to just get ignored. I like the way Christian talked about it's everybody's business. Sustainability is not just sustainability team's business, but it is everybody's business. And this is what makes these opportunities and strategies to be not technical, but transformational. Now, I go through at least 10 to 12 examples a day about how people are doing stuff on the ground. So today I'd like to highlight 8 powerful examples of how net zero strategies are improving lives, not just reducing emissions. These projects span housing, museums, schools, hospitals, hotels, and retail spaces. And each one shows how net zero can be a tool for equity, health, and resilience, and how they all can leverage our certification program, the GNFZ certification, to demonstrate their leadership around the world, because it's very, very important to communicate. So the first one favorite to me is led by my friend Marshall Goberty, Bradenton Workforce Housing in Florida. It's a first workforce housing development, net zero workforce housing development. It provides resilient and affordable homes for essential workers. So it integrates the basic stuff, right? Integrating electrification, energy efficiency, and community engagement, which means a lower utility costs, improved air quality, and most importantly, fostering a community pride through inclusive design, because everybody must be brought into the ecosystem. Next is the North Hanover Historical Museum in New Jersey. This museum achieved net zero operations via rooftop solar, even for sensitive archival storage. So it serves as a community education hub, because they share, like the way we talked about earlier, it's an education hub. So making sustainability not only visible and accessible, but actionable in progress. And then it improves indoor air quality, supports public engagement, and also demonstrates how cultural institutions can lead by example. Then the next one is Edelman Fossil Park and Museum in New Jersey. Again, it is designed to be all electric and pursuing the Living Building Challenge Energy Petal certification. PATL certification. And it integrates site orientation, visitor engagement, and educational programming to promote climate literacy. Of course, we can never have enough education on this topic. And it raises the living standard by combining scientific learning with healthy indoor environments. Then my favorite, all-time favorite, I encourage everybody to visit PIPS. I am phenomenally impressed by Richard Pleasantly, the leader behind the PIPS Conservatory campus in Pennsylvania. It includes multiple net zero and high performance buildings like the Center for Sustainable Landscapes, because these spaces offer public tours, workshops, and green job training, enhancing both community well-being and environmental stewardship on the platform of being the greenest building that I would claim in this country. I mean, the commitment, the work that Richard and team have done is phenomenal. Then the next one is Montgomery Middle School expansion in California. It's a LEED Platinum certified school. I'm so impressed by that school. It achieved net zero energy through solar and high energy HVAC system. And the design improves thermal comfort and supports student health and includes stormwater systems that enhance local water resilience, because water is a sensitive subject for our California state. Then Kaiser Permanente's hospitals in multiple states, they are implementing net zero strategies across their hospital network. It's very hard. It's very hard to do anything in the hospitals, the sustainability itself. But raising the bar on net zero strategy is altogether a different ballgame. Again, electrification, renewable energy, indoor environmental upgrades. So you can see a theme there. Regardless of the sector, if you stick to the basics, you can make occupational impact. Here, in this case, the hospitals are improving patient recovery, which we would all care about, and then reducing medical errors. That's more important. And importantly, supporting our healthcare worker well-being, because they are putting the time into it to make us feel healthy and better, and we have to pay it back. Then Marriott International's MERA program. The MERA program evaluates climate risk across all its US properties. So it includes, obviously, again, energy efficient retrofits, solar installations, and here it's all about guest comfort. Now, they are doing so much work to improve staff safety, guest well-being, and community resilience, because who doesn't want to stay in a Marriott? And then last but not the least, the mixed-use retail developments. Multiple retail developments are happening in Florida, so I won't list every project, but they are all interestingly pursuing net zero waste certification. So if emissions was harder, they are going after water. If water is harder, they are going after energy. If energy is harder, they are going after waste. Do something, get started, because it's all about getting started on the net zero journey. Here, interestingly, these retail stores are implementing circular economy principles because their consumers care about it. And their consumers care that you are a responsible organization. So they are reducing landfill impact and improving public health through better air quality and community engagement. So net zero is not just a goal. It's a pathway for a better life. That's what these projects are showing to us. Now, where are we coming in? Our role is to be the mirror, the scale, and most importantly, the enabler. So we help projects like this, and even who are just getting started, demonstrate progress toward net zero, not just claim it. We need proof, we need validation. Why? Because that is what inspires action in the marketplace. We saw that day in, day out with our LEED program. When we started, the first LEED building led to the second LEED building, the second LEED building to the next 100 buildings. That's how the journey starts. So our certification framework includes 3 steps. Initiate. It basically starts with emission inventory and net zero plan. Second is implementation, reduction strategies and milestone certificates. And sustaining it is more important than achieving it, because achievement is one level of scale, but sustaining it is completely a different ballgame. So you need to implement ongoing monitoring and strategy refinement. And this is something that Sarah touched on very eloquently earlier. And it is very, very important to kind of understand this journey to net zero and then achieving it. Of course, our goal is to always offer flexible certification for buildings and, of course, portfolios of buildings. And the reason flexibility is important is because we have created enough barriers. All the systems that we have in place today are rule books, and there are more rules being written. And I'm not against rules, but rules without outcomes just becomes a very subjective conversation all along, and it becomes an impediment to scaling. So that is something that we are very particular, that we meet people where we are. I think that is one of the other golden nuggets I got from Christian's presentation, saying that, look, everybody can start, and everybody can start from where they are and make the progress that they desire. And then peer-to-peer collaboration. This is the network. Without you, somebody else will not get benefited. Your knowledge is important. So join us, engage with us, and we will make sure that other people engage with you to provide that larger connectivity that is needed to scale such a complicated goal that we have, and of course a complex goal to achieve. Transparent reporting and public storytelling is mandatory, and that is something we take pride in. So I've said this before, we must democratize sustainability. We must make it accessible, measurable, and meaningful. And that is exactly why we founded GNFC, because GNFC is just doing that, empowering projects to track, validate, and share their journey, of course, in partnership with Green Badger and other software platforms that are actually doing magic on the ground. Now, when I think about net zero, it is not the finish line, believe it or not. It's the foundation. It leads us to regenerative design, because we need spaces that restore ecosystems and uplift communities. It builds resilience, particularly structures that withstand climate shocks and support public health. The notion that, bad things won't happen is something that we all desire, but bad things do happen because we don't control weather. But when those bad things happen, can the infrastructure come in the way of supporting and enabling a human performance? Is very, very important. We should not keep demanding people to compensate for it. And that is something that will be nice to do. In fact, my friend Marshall Gobati in Florida, he has built such a phenomenal property that during last 2 hurricanes, his property was untouched. And that's a resilience in action case study that I'm very proud to keep talking about. And I'm sure there are hundreds of examples that are already there or that could be achieved with all the tools and knowledge we have. Again, sustainability must be about compassion. It must be about how we treat each other. And that's the future we are building. Net zero that raises the living standard. Now, to wrap it up, let's not reframe sustainability as a climate imperative, right? But it is a human imperative, because we moved away from that dialogue. Yes, climate is important, but if you put the human being in the middle of it, particularly during COVID, you saw it in stark contrast. You saw equity come into focus. You saw resilience come into focus. You saw sustainability became a sharp thing that we all needed to focus on, and health and well-being came into a larger question of being risky. And that created an economic shutdown of the global marketplace. And that is something that we don't want to be ever in. And the only way to do that is to start focusing on human beings and make this as a human imperative than a climate imperative. And I even like the statement from Christian again, which is to say, make it a human and a business imperative. Naturally, things will follow. So regardless of whether you're a policymaker, architect, construction leader, developer, tenant, aspirant, advocate, student, all of it, we need you to make the choices to shape the health of the communities and, more importantly, contribute to it. So let's build spaces that heal, inspire, and endure. And let's lead this movement to raise the living standard through net zero together. Thank you very much. Sarah, back to you.
Great. So it looks like we only have one question in the chat. So if anyone else has any questions, please kind of log them in the chat, and we'll just take a second to let those come in. And Kristen, I don't know if you want to speak to the one question that we did get.
Yeah, absolutely. So Green Badger is a software provider. So we primarily work with general contractors. So, and the question refers to, and I'm going to take it as general contractors, because that's my world of expertise, is who's actually walking the walk, right? Like a lot of folks like to chat about the different sustainability efforts, but who are the ones that are actually taking some of the steps that I saw today that are changing the way that they operate their business and the construction sites. So just to kind of set from where I'm going to come from with this, I totally appreciate and understand the question that you're asking. There are several GCs that are putting in the work, that are at various steps in their journey. There are some that are definitely further than others. At Green Badger, we are a software provider to help general contractors track their impact and understand how they can go about making those changes. So it's not really a framework that we're coming out and saying, what qualifies as someone that's walking the walk versus not. But I think that there are a lot of case studies out there from general contractors on what they have tried in the field and what has been working. A couple of places to specifically call out, the Advancing Construction Decarbonization Conference is, the hub for all sustainability leaders in construction companies. We hosted a panel with some of our users that are doing that work and talking about some of the things that they've been able to achieve with the data collection that we've helped there. But there's a lot of good case studies that are in that conference program. And then another place that we haven't brought up yet, there's actually a the large general contractors here in the US, they have a peer network called the Sustainable Construction Leaders. And so some of them have made commitments to that as well that are publicly available on their website. So there's not like one formalized list, I think, of who's, you know, the most sustainable. And I think there's been a lot of conversation with that. Again, when we talk about the differences between size of companies, you know, what's feasible, the different types of work that they do they have any like self-performed components? So right now there's really no way to like rank or measure, but there are case studies out there. And I mean, I'd be happy to follow up with you with a couple of links to like some real life examples, if that would be helpful of what GCs are doing on their sites.
Great. I think those are all of the questions that we have. So we'll be sure to also share the recording of the webinar with everyone who attended as well, and happy to share the slides in addition. Mahesh, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yes, I wanted to just tell everybody, if you have a project that you would like to test drive through our platform, our combined platforms, that's always welcome. If you have great case studies to share with us, please do share. If you are interested in participating in a similar webinar like this, let us know. Us and Green Badger will be more than happy to host it together to build that larger conversation of engagement and collaboration, because the knowledge is here, and how we articulate and promote that is very, very important. So please reach out to either of us, Green Badger or us, and then share your success stories, and let's share more knowledge and experiences, which I think will benefit the larger community. Zero is foundational. Let's remember that. Thank you very much.